Okay, good morning. So last class, International Realism. And I decided, more or less at the last minute, to concentrate on the Munich School of Painting. I was intending to do more and show some of the Russian or Ukrainian painter, but as we are having that program in June on Ukraine, some of that is going to be covered, and the rest will be covered at length in September when we start the new series. So the reason why the Munich School of Painting is important is because not only it was a very international school, we'll see that, but also it produced many known artists in the States that we will also see in September. But we right now trying to concentrate around 1850. Before I go into the school itself, I want to give you a little context in the history of, if we can say, the unification, not reunification, but the unification of Germany. Let me see, always the first one. So just a few dates that we will then follow with some maps. So in 1806, we have the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire that was led by Austria. And suddenly Austria is losing that leadership on all the German states that it used to have. In 1815, which corresponds to the exile of Napoleon to St. Helena Island, there is a Congress of Vienna with all the big powers in Europe. And following that Congress of Vienna, there will be a creation of the German Confederation, which is an association of 39 German sovereign states. We have to realize that until then, the German states were in the numbers of over 300 states, some very large ones, Bavaria, Prussia, and so on, but some tiny ones that were independent and ruled by either bishops or princes, or in all of them being electors. What's that? Calling from Europe. I don't know. What is really interesting, that kind of crossing, going against the grain of the creation of the German Confederation, is the creation of the Zollverein. And the Zollverein is almost like a common market, if you want, that was much earlier than the EU's, but that's tried to organize tariffs, common tariffs for the customs, and some treaties, some commercial treaties with others. So they were quite ahead of the time. And part of that Zollverein was actually even some states that were not part of the German states. But the thing is, it kind of went against some of the rules of the German Confederation and weakened that German Confederation. As almost everywhere in Europe, in 1848, there is a revolution that is triggered by some intellectual that have enough of the ruling of the princes. When Napoleon came through Germany, he really brought with him some brand new ideas. And a lot of intellectuals supported him until he crowned himself emperor. But prior to being emperor, Napoleon was bringing some very, very new ideas that a lot of the Germans loved. And so it remained there. It remained there. They didn't forget it, even if the princes came back and ruled. For them, it was the kind of a future. And they tried to revolt in 48. It didn't work. But then we jumped to 1862, when Bismarck was named Prussian minister president by King William I. His predecessor was a rather weak king that, in a sense, wanted to open up to many things, but then was guided and oppressed by his court, and finally backed out. But once William I came up, he was much more ambitious, and we'll see what's going to happen. just after Bismarck, no, in 67, sorry, to 71, there was a shift from the German Confederation to North German Federation under the leadership of Prussia, from which Austria was excluded. They really pushed Austria out of the group. And in 71, you have then, after the Franco-Prussian War, you have the establishment of the German Empire announced in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. We saw that painting last time. King William I becomes German emperor, and Bismarck is appointed to serve as chancellor, and that's history. Following that, we'll have, of course, the First World War. So I'm going to show you that together with some maps. And I think this is really interesting. So this is, in all these colors, you see the Confederation of the Rhine, which was a union of client states of the First French Empire. That goes from 1806 to 1813. This being part of the French Empire at that time, but this is what the kind of union of Germanic states. The next map shows you the German Confederation that was founded in 1815, changes slightly the borders. And as you can see, at that time, Austria is still part of it, of the Confederation. So you have the red border there. Following, as we talked about, we have the Zollverein that includes all these states that, as I said, try to have the common tariffs, custom tariffs, and some of the commercial treaties between them. But you can see that, for example, Hungary is excluded from there. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is split here. Then finally, from 66 to 71, we have the North German Confederation. This is when Bismarck is in charge. As I said, William I is quite conservative, but on the other hand, very pragmatic. And the nomination of Bismarck is going to be an enormous step with the personality of the guy. They'll dissolve the North German Federation. And but it's after the 7 Weeks War, then the German Confederation is going to be dissolved in 71. Austria will be excluded, and finally, Austria doesn't have that enormous influence that it had on these German states. But as you can see, these are the northern. Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden are excluded from there too. And so finally, after the pushing of Prussia and so on, we come to the Imperial Germany that's going to last until the end of the First World War in 1918. And you can see the very large territory that it covered. This time it includes Bavaria, Württemberg, and the Baden, but excludes Austria. But you can see the blue, that's how much Prussia expanded. When it was, before that, just that part of the country. So this means a lot of turmoil during the period that we're going to cover. Here is the timeline showing, we're going to look at painters from a whole series of countries here, because the Munich school was extremely international. And I'm adding to that Courbet, because he's going to have a great influence. He's going to come and visit them in Munich. And literally is going to change from one day to the other some of the horizon of some of these painters. So he's going to be a great influence. And in gold here, you have two of the main German figures and talking realism. We'll explain that within the school. In blue, some Greek painters, a Hungarian one here, and two Polish and one Swedish painter. Now, there were more than that in each of these categories, but these are the ones that not only, most of them are going to do history paintings because it was still the way to affirm yourself at the academy, but many of them are going to produce some quite lovely art in a realist painting. At the bottom, I put a little bit so that you have an idea how it interferes with their life. So German Empire is pretty much in the middle of what you see here, and then Bismarck. And then we have, of course, World War I down there. So the Munich School of Painting is actually derived from the Academy, the Munich Academy of Art. This is a building that was built in the late 19th century, and it's very typical of the academic world, where they all look rather traditional, but it's a big building. And so you can imagine the number of classes they had in there. The academy had been founded in 1770 by the Elector Maximilian III. It was called at that time a drawing school, but really served as that Academy of Fine Art. It was enhanced in 1808 by King Maximilian I Joseph of Bavaria, and became the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. And then in the 19th century, they built that Renaissance revival style, large building. So in the 1850s, we see a tendency by the Munich School to move away from Romanticism. It had some known teachers. Probably the most famous was Carl von Piloty, who was professor between 56 and director in 74. The approach to history painting was influenced by the French academician Paul de la Roche and by the painterly colorism of Rubens and the Venetians. And you always have these type of influences very much coming from the main teachers. How they've been influenced, they're going to themselves project that on their students. The most influential teachers at the academy is Wilhelm von Thiers and Wilhelm von Kaulbach, Arthur von Hamburg, and Nikolaos Gysis, who is Greek, and became a very important professor there. The style is very naturalistic and a dark chiaroscuro, as you will see. Typical subjects are landscape, portraits, genre, stylized, but the history painting, as I said, was always a must if you wanted to establish yourself as a serious painter. Once you were established, you could do what you wanted, pretty much. I give a whole series of painters, of which I'm only going to show a few. But what is really interesting is the large international colony that comes from Greece, Hungary, Poland, Sweden, and the USA. And then the last generation of that group will include nearly all the major figures of the German avant-garde, such as Wassily Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Franz Marc, and so on. So it really is going to evolve tremendously towards the end of the century and produce these extremely important figures that are going to change modernism. So let's start with two German painters, the young Wilhelm Leibl that lived from 1844. He was born in Cologne, where his father was the director of the cathedral choir. So he was already in an artistic environment. And he entered the Munich Academy in 1864 and worked with von Piloty as a teacher. He actually very quickly had a strong personality, founded a group studio with some other painters. And it is about that time in 1869 that Gustave Courbet made a trip to Munich and literally demonstrated how he was painting to them. And that was a discovery. He made a considerable impression on the local artist. He demonstrated how he was painting alla prima, which means without drawing on the canvas. He would just start painting immediately on the raw canvas. And directly from nature also. So this was a revolution for these young painters. So Leibel is going to be very much influenced by that and became very quickly, you will see, he's quite a lovely painter. But he also was influenced by the Dutch and the Dutch masters, and we will see, actually there is a mixture. We can find some Manet in his work without him knowing Manet. So in 1869, following the visit by Courbet, he decided to go to Paris, where he was, you see, I forgot that, where he was introduced to Edouard Manet. And so we will see how his blacks and so on are very much Manet-like. But then he was forced to return to Germany in 70 due to the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. In 73, Leibel left Munich to go on to the countryside, where he started showing peasants, local peasants, and just the surroundings that you can find in the countryside. Then finally, he moved to another little town and really changed. Every time he moved, you can see that his style is changing. So just the fact that he paints alla prima after meeting Courbet and so on will show that he's slowly approaching the technique of the Impressionist. So this is one of the portraits that he did in 71. And that shows directly the influence of Manet in the treatment of the black. He doesn't use the way of modeling that was the classical way, but more with outlines. The face is very naturalistic and shows quite a mastery in painting. And another work by him, also I think very much in the style of Manet, showing the three women in the church. This is one of his most known painting, and shows really that realistic style and very clear definition of the figures. I think it's quite an interesting painting. And now that you know his name, you can look into it, but I cannot go any further. Another of the German group, from that group, is Wilhelm Trübner. He was born in Heidelberg and was the third son of a silver and goldsmith, which is interesting because when you think goldsmith, the son of a goldsmith, I think right away to Dürer, because Dürer was also the son of a goldsmith. And being in that environment, you learn to do things with detail and very crafty. He started studying at the academy in Munich in 69 and was also greatly impressed by the visit of Courbet. By the early 70s, he started traveling to Italy, Holland, and Belgium, and then in Paris also encountered the art of Manet. And Manet will have a whole class dedicated to Manet in September, or it could be October. So here is one of his portraits, and I think you could really transfer that to the French school. It's so typical of that period, but quite, if you put yourself in his shoes, he was very avant-garde in the treatment in that painting on the sofa, painted in 1872. you can see again the realism. She's having a cup of tea or something, and she's almost ready to speak. You have that instant that is portrayed there. The love for all the flowers on the background and so on is very typical of that period too. And here's another of his painting, famous, the Carpenters on the banks of Westling Lake. And there is an interest in the perspective there. You can see that almost is reminds you of Caillebotte, if you know Caillebotte, the French Impressionist. But also the treatment of the landscape at the back is rather, it's almost abstract. It really becomes a less descriptive thing. It's just kind of a backdrop. As I mentioned, quite an international group. There was a whole colony of Greek painters. I'm just going to show you, I think it's 2 or 3 of them. But Konstantinos Folanakis was born in an island. No, he was born in Crete, in Heraklion. Just a little word on the history of Greece at that time. In 1821, the Greeks declared their independence from the Ottomans, but it wasn't achieved until 29. And in fact, depended on the goodwill of the Brits and the French and so on. It was, everybody had its words to say except the Greeks. So finally, the great powers that at first wanted to conserve the Ottoman Empire the way it was, decided, no, we're going to support you. And so finally, after big fights, as you know, between the Greeks and the Ottomans, that included a lot of people coming to help. As you know, Lord Byron went to fight for the Greeks against. Sorry, but that's my mom. So finally, in 27, the Brits, the French, and the Russian naval force destroyed the Ottoman and Egyptian. I have to respond, otherwise she's not. Maman, je donne cours. Okay? Anyway. So finally, that was. Okay. Maman, je donne cours.
Oh, excuse-moi, pardon.
So that was part of the Greece, the central part of Greece was liberated, and it's only later on that Thessaly, which is on north of Athens, was given back to Athens, and then the English gave back some islands on the western part, and Crete only in 1898 was joined back to Greece. So a lot of story, and the capital became Athens, but only after it migrated from 2 cities to Athens. So here for this painter, sorry, I'm coming back. They moved finally his family moved in 56 to another city in Crete. And then he went to study in Trieste, which is at the border of Italy and what was Yugoslavia at that time, and was told that he should join the colony of Greek painters in Munich, again with von Piloty, and he went there and joined another 4 Greek painters, quite nice. He really took a lot of advantage for that, but then he decided to go back to Greece against the advice of his friends who said, you will never have a career. And unfortunately, that's what happened. He went back to Greece, taught, but became really poor and had to finally to sell his works. He worked with some frame makers that were making extraordinary frame, and he would put his painting in and that they would sell. That was quite interesting. But here is one of his works, the collecting the nets. As you can see, of course, when you Greeks use the seas surrounding you, so it becomes one of the major themes. But really pretty treatment of the light and the reflection in the water. He also did some more official paintings because he was quite recognized by the authorities. And this is an interesting point, is the inauguration of the Corinth canal that had been dug in, and you can see where they come from. Another of that group, Georgios Hoylos, considered the most important and influential Greek painter of the time, was born in the mainland in 1867 and lived until 28. Unfortunately, I couldn't find very good reproduction because they are in the general public, they're not very known, and I can't even find where they're located, but I wanted to show it to you. He went to study at the Julian Academy in Paris in 1890, after studying for 2 years in Munich, and then returned to Athens. After that, went to London, stayed in Liverpool, and then back to Greece. So this is definitely an interesting painting for Greek people because it represents the most important poets of the time in Greece. That group that are identified, but you wouldn't know too much, but they really are the most important representatives of the new Athenian school of poetry. And again, put ourselves that Greece had just been under the boot of the Ottomans for so many years, so many centuries, I would say. For them to come back to their culture was paramount. Painting, poetry, anything that they could do in their own language and being recognized, it was nationalism at best. And here, laundresses in Venice. So that's, again, shows quite a realistic, subject, showing the hard workers along the laguna in Venice. One of the most famous of the Greek, though, was Nikolaos Gysis, that was born on the island of Tinos and then studied at the Athens School of Fine Arts, and finally won a scholarship to Munich in '65, and really incorporated himself very well into that group, but became a professor himself at the academy. I think he's got an incredible face and attitude. Is very sure of himself there. And his art is quite interesting here. The barber, showing the little boy. That's a little bit reminiscent of our famous American artist that was doing these more, gentle scenes. This is not showing pain or poverty or whatever. It's just showing everyday work. And I love the attitude of the little boy, the hand of the barber, he can't do anything. And this other work, The Orphans. And again, there you can see the influence of Courbet and Manet very much into that work.
It's like one of those scenes in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, exactly, very much. I mentioned a Hungarian painter. I dare not even come to pronounce his name. I think it's Julia Agassi. He was born in Dombovar in '50 and was interested in music and art for a short time, played violin at the National Theatre, but then reoriented himself and attended the Academy of Fine Art in Vienna and finally the one in Munich. Then in return in Hungary in 1874, but decided to travel to Paris and became the pupil in Paris of a Hungarian painter, which is quite interesting. He's quite specialist in genre painting. You see, it's a very pretty subject, these two in the sunlit field, but he also specialized in lots of history paintings. I'm not showing it because they were at that time, they were recognized as main works. They have lost their flavor compared to this. But I think the way he catches the light is absolutely beautiful. Now from Poland, we have a very different temperament, which is quite interesting. That how, when you go through this, you see how culture is influential on people. And you will see some of the work of Józef Helmonski, who was born near Lowice in central Poland under Russian military control at that time. He finished high school in Warsaw and took some private lessons there and then was sent to Munich from 1871 to 74 and worked with other Polish painters that were there. He went around Poland, the different territories, and went around Ukraine and the Tatra mountain. He went to Paris later on in 75. Traveled through Poland, Vienna, and Venice. And some of his paintings, again, are quite remarkable. This is definitely part of his discovery of the territory in northern Poland when he visited that around 74. And so you can see Trial Before the Village Mayor. And you can almost feel the cold of that all that snow that is there, and then people discussing there on their horse and sled. It's in a sense reminiscent of Ilya Repin, who we will see. So I think, again, very interesting painting. These coming two are quite nice too. This is the storks, and so you have the storks flying. This is the change of season. Loved the contact with his homeland and the nature. And this is one of the two most adored paintings by him that is actually in Warsaw itself. And then this one is one of his most, also one of his most preferred. So the partridges in the snow, and very simple, but the treatment of the white that goes and still delineates a horizon is quite remarkable. And then just these birds, they're dark on the snow. It's very avant-garde in the concept.
Would this be done with a photo reference?
In 1891, it could be, though it's difficult to know if they had. They would probably sketch rapidly. As you know,
I doubt the bird stood still for the portrait.
No, but don't forget, any painter that has a lot of experience has tremendous visual memory. You know that, Jerry. You don't have to have a thing. Sometimes the image is in your brain. But it's quite a remarkable painting, and they love it. And it's not small. It's 84 inches by 78. So it's a large painting. Another of these Polish painter, Józef Brandt, studied in Warsaw and then went to the École Centrale in Paris, went then to Munich under Franz Adam and Count Piloty, He painted mostly studies of 17th century military life. That was part of these large history painting, but also did some quite interesting and very energetic type of, if we can call them genre painting, but portraying some of the life at that time. And this is the Cossack's wedding. And so you have in the center, you see the bride and the groom on the horses and surrounded by a wild group of people playing tambourine and shooting some guns and so on. And even the balalaika is there. But you can, when you see that, you see the quality immediately of these painters. Probably the most known and also a painter that became professor at the School of Munich is Alfred Kowalski. Settled in Munich in 76 after studies in Warsaw, Prague, and Dresden. And he studied for a year and then was nominated as honorary professor at the school. He was the most popular Polish painter in Munich. He went to Africa and did the whole tour in Africa also. And these paintings are just incredible. Again, it's very much part of the culture, you can see. You wouldn't see that in Greece, but it's so much the Polish culture of the time. You had the horse, the snow, the harsh climate, and then people really surviving, but with energy. And I think it's very well rendered. His most famous painting is regarding wolves. And there's a pack of wolves, but he's got other paintings with just one head of a wolf. They're just superb. You know that he's seen them close. By the way, he was quite popular here in the States. Now, the last of these Polish painter, Ignacy Jerimski, I'm not sure that I pronounce it properly, also attended the school in Warsaw in 67 and then came to Munich and studied there from 68 to 72. He went then to Italy and decided to go back to Poland, but really ended up really very much angry and resentful of what life had become at that time and how life treated him. And he ended up in an insane asylum, unfortunately. But again, quite a talent. This is a painting that he did, the Jewish woman selling oranges. Just that contrast of her, and then you have the city behind, all the grays and blues is quite beautiful, but the pitiful face, I mean, you have resignation there, but also I'm fighting for a very difficult life. And when you know how the Jews were treated in Poland, this is part of the problem. Unfortunately, in Poland, his works were not understood. And it's only in France and in Germany then that he got more successful. And here's another of his works, Peasant Coffin. Love the little dog that's all coiled there at the front. And then another of his works, the Feast of Trumpets. So it's all rabbis and the Jewish clerics that are celebrating the Feast of Trumpets. but you can immediately see, I mean, they're so unknown to us, but it's incredible. When you look at that, you know that the composition and everything is there. It's absolutely quality, top quality. Now he has become recognized, and here is in the Warsaw National Museum, he has an entire room that is dedicated to his works.
Is that his sculpture also?
Pardon?
Is that his sculptures in there also? Or?
I don't know. If you knew the little information I can find on this, it's really difficult. And then finally, one of the Swedes that were there, Johan Frederick Höckert. This is the time where also Sweden is fighting Germany, fighting Denmark, and so on. So very unrest, big unrest, but also in Sweden, the rise of communism, quite important with the writings of Karl Marx. He's one of the most famous Swedish painters in the 19th century. And again, he not only went around, but he finally focused on the culture in his own country. And this is one of just lovely work of the Frederick girl by the far side. And this is really reminiscent of what you can find in 17th century Dutch painting, Flemish and Dutch painting, or Chardin in the 18th century in France, but with the ethnic side of Sweden in it. Now he was asked, again, as I mentioned, all these painters did history painting. So I'm going to finish on a history painting. He was asked by a very important Swedish man to make a painting of a fire that took place in the royal palace at the time in Sweden. And this is a large painting. He worked on it, but then he had to interrupt to take a trip somewhere. And when he came back, the Count Trollholm castle decided he wasn't interested in the painting. So he finished it and he exhibited it, though it was not quite finished when he exhibited it, but had a great success. Didn't sell it, but he put his name on the wall, literally wrote his name on the wall, and he became much more famous after showing that. And finally, his descendant bought the painting and offered it to the National Museum in Stockholm. Now, when you look at that, you can find some Rembrandt in there, and because it's a history painting, it has to remain traditional. But quite a large painting. So in Munich, we also saw different names, and we'll talk about them in September. But Currier, the great engraver Currier, worked there, Duveneck, William Mary Chase, Harry Chase, and others all went to that school and came back to the US, quite influenced, with the detour of Courbet in the same image. And we'll see realism in America and realism in Russia in September. So that will be another time. And so starting in September, this class of Thursdays moved to the Saturday morning. We're trying to get some people that are working during the week and could maybe join us. And this will cover from 1850 to 1900. So we have the end of realism, Barbizon, the pre-Raphaelites in England, the Impressionism in France, post-Impressionism, and Art Nouveau. So it's going to be an enormous program. So let me stop the recording.